Morning, folks. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me on this Friday, this rainy, cloudy Friday. Um, what we're going to do today is obviously go through the lecture for whatever activity we're on, but I also want to give you a heads up on how things are going to kind of run for the rest of the semester because we're almost done. Um, what I want and what I've done is I kind of created a little bit of how things are going to work. So obviously today we're going to do the assignment, and then you're going to have your weekend. Next week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Wednesday being the 27th. I'm going to do three lessons back to back. That way we have time for what I have planned. Um, on that Wednesday, I'm going to give you your project for this unit. There's not going to be a written assignment for this unit, just a project, and then I'm going to give you it that I'm going to give it to you on the 27th. So after my last video, I'm going to give you or the last lecture for this unit. I'm going to give you the project, and then you'll do that. You'll have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to do that, and however long it takes you. From June 1st, that Monday afterwards, to June 5th, that week, I'm going to give you a lecture every day, so that we can finish Unit 6 in that week. Unit 6 has no project, it has no written assignment. Unit 6 is only based on the questions in this booklet and the definitions and your summaries. So, June 5th, we'll be done with this unit. June 12th, write this in your calendar. I'm going to post this sort of thing on our announcement section too, so don't worry if you forget these dates. You don't have to watch the video again. June 12th is the last day I'm going to take any assignment in. So if you have something that you want marked, June 12th is the last day to get it to me. That's a Friday. After that, I don't want anything. So that's kind of that's kind of the little brief introduction I wanted to do. I'm gonna, like I said, post that all on our D2L announcement section, just so that you know what's expected of you of these coming days. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more put together, but it's okay. You'll be fine. There's only really one big project coming up, and obviously the booklets too, but again, you have lots of time. It'll be fine. Plus, you've been working on these booklets all the while. Okay, so we are on student activity number 33. So this is page 6 in the booklet. We're going to focus our question today on what are the responses of the nation state to internationalism. So how do nation states, how do countries respond to internationalism? There's a bunch of terms, and each one of those terms that I'm going to introduce today are a response to internationalism. So the terms are isolationism, unilateralism, bilateralism, multilateralism, supranationalism, and protectionism. I'm going to give you an example of each of them, and I'm going to give you a definition for each of those. These are the ways that countries respond to international things. We talked about things like humanitarianism, peace and security, economic stability, self-determination, all those things we talked about in the last video. These are how countries respond to them. However they respond, it depends on the policy, it depends on the government really in that country. So we're going to go through these, and then we're going to be done for the day. So, how do nations and states respond to events can depend on many factors. People may naturally seek protection during times of stress, such as the Great Depression or during war. Right now is also an example. People are looking to their governments, people are looking to people in authority positions or in industries to provide us with some sort of comfort, some sort of peace. Justin Trudeau has been going on online or on television, and he's been talking about Canada's response to this coronavirus. industries that say produce medical equipment, we've looked to them to supply us with things that will help us. So like the masks, the gloves, the hand sanitizers, the alcohol wipes, those sort of things. We look to them for some sort of peace and some sort of security in these sort of times. Several terms are used to describe how nations interact. So I've introduced all these concepts to you. We're going to run through the list just so you have a good understanding of what each of them means. You know what they are, and you've even mentioned them. You've even spoken about them in your projects or your written assignments in the past. But I'm going to give you the I guess the social studies word for that concept, or that idea that you know so well. So the first one we're going to talk about is isolation or isolationism. It refers to when a country stops interacting with other nations socially, politically, economically, or militarily. So essentially, really, it's when a country puts up walls. So the image there of the president of the United States, Donald Trump, putting up a wall around America, that is example of isolationism. It's just closing yourself off from any sort of interaction with the international community, or interacting with them, or in being influenced by them. So some of the most famous examples is Japan. Japan had an isolationist policy until it was forced to interact with the world by the United States in 1854. So for those of you that remember grade 8 social studies, you would have learned that the Edo period in Japan was a period of isolationism, where they had some contact with Dutch merchants, but they had a strict policy of no entry to foreigners. The Americans come, and because of things like the Industrial Revolution, the Japanese were far behind. So where they were using swords and spears and bows and arrows, the Americans came with steel ships, cannons, and guns. And they opened up Japan. So then we get the Meiji period, and then the full induction of Japan into the international community. The United States also had a limited form of isolation until World War I. So that period of the 1920s and 1930s is when they had a form of isolation, where they didn't want to get brought into another European war. They had joined World War I at the end. They didn't want to get dragged into those sort of conflicts again. They said absolutely no to the League of Nations, even though it was their president who had introduced the idea. So they had that form of isolation, where they didn't want to be brought into things. Yes, they were willing to lend money and give resources to the international community, but they didn't want any other involvement. They were there just to be that sort of lender or trader. Currently, there are countries. Most countries will have the limited a limited form of isolation. An excellent example in our modern world is Switzerland. So Switzerland refuses to take sides in international disputes. It has declared itself a neutral nation. So you won't see the Swiss joining any wars, but they will trade and are involved in environmental issues with other nations. So the Swiss will join, like the Paris Peace Agreement, or not the Paris Agreement on climate change. They will interact with those sort of situations, but they will not join things like international disputes. They won't join military alliances. Yes, they are part of the United Nations, but they will try their best not to, and they've made it a policy not to involve themselves in other things. Another example, a more extreme example, is say North Korea, where North Korea has barred itself and has very little contact with the outside world. The Chinese have some contact with North Korea, but for the most part, there is no political or diplomatic relations with other countries. Another form of isolation. So, unilateralism is when a country responds independently to world events without discussing with other countries. So, Japan in World War II, even prior to World War II, when they invaded China and took over northern China, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and all these places along the coast. Essentially, what they're saying is we don't care what the rest of the world says. So when the League of Nations said what Japan is doing is bad, you need to stop doing that, the Japanese basically got up and left. They left the League of Nations and they didn't look back. So unilateralism is best summed up with this little image here, my way or the highway, in terms of the way that these countries respond to things. The Japanese in World War II, or we could talk about America, at basically any time, because they really are quite interesting when it comes to their relation, excuse me, with other countries, especially during the Cold War, which you'll talk about next year. So you'll have a really interesting conversation there. Unilateralism. Okay, bilateralism refers to when two countries reach an agreement. So it's any sort of agreement. Canada and the United States have the Canada-United States Air Quality Agreement. So this is an example of two countries attempting to resolve an issue which affects both of them. So there is the fear of contaminating the air to the point where we will get things like acid rain, which, if you don't know what acid rain is, it's in the name, acid rain. It burns things when it rains. It happens when there's too much pollutants and toxins in the air. So the United States and Canada have made it sort of an agreement that they will have this joint sort of quality assurance for air quality between the two nations. So that is that's why you'll hear things like bilateral agreement. These sort of agreements are just basically two countries saying, "Hey, we agree on this one thing together. Well, let's make it official." Think of it like when two countries get married. How about that? Okay, multilateralism. It's in the name as well. So multilateral is when several countries work together to reach an agreement. So those countries like Canada who have some power but are not considered superpowers or global powers have influence in the world but not enough to act, and they tend to approach problems multilaterally. So they couldn't just have two countries come together because they wouldn't really do anything, but if you have a bunch of countries come together, then you can see. So things like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization are examples of international bodies that try to solve problems multilaterally. This photo here is a meeting between the heads of state of Russia. You got Putin there. You got Prime Minister Modi of India. The lady in the blue, I forget her name, but she was the president of Brazil. The man with the red tie is Xi Jinping, the president of China. And then the man up in the glasses, I don't know who he is. But you have countries like this who are coming together. And some of those countries, China and India and Brazil, are going to be the next superpowers if they can continue to follow the same trend of development and industrialization that they have. So these groups will come together and they will join forces to make a stronger impact on the world community. Where they couldn't, well, some of them could in this picture, but some of these countries can't do it alone. So multilateralism. Supranationalism. It's not supernationalism, it's supranationalism. Refers to when nations or states agree to an independent international body to reach an agreement. So the European Union is an example of this form of structure. States must give up a certain degree of sovereignty for this to work. So the European Union, the EU, is an organization in Europe. Most of Europe is a part of it. And essentially, they have lowered certain sort of rights and sovereignty to join. So, for example, trade tariffs. So these sort of like... when goods come in and out, sometimes there's taxes on them. They have none, so they can trade freely. It's open trade. People who are part of a European Union country, sorry, my daughter's having a moment. They can travel throughout the European Union with a European Union passport, and so things like customs, they go through a lighter version of customs. These images, the image on slide 23, these are examples of supranationalism or supranationalist kind of organizations. So you can see there's North America. There would be things like NORAD with Canada, the United States. The European Union is there. The Soviet Union and is there as well. And then when the Soviet Union broke up, there's an organization with the ex-Soviet states. There's one for Southeast Asia. There's one for French-speaking peoples. So they're very there a lot of them exist, and really they're there to reach agreements between many different countries around the world. So a lot of them will have trade relationships that are made. They will have linguistic sharing of resources and culturally significant works, things like that. So supranationalism is more of a cooperation among peoples. So next one is protectionism. So countries can attempt to shield their own domestic industries from foreign competition by taxing imports. So when you tax an import, this is known as a tariff. A tariff is a tax on a foreign good designed to make domestic goods seem less expensive, and then the government will reap those sort of benefits. So, for example, let's say I am a country and I make watches. That's what my country makes. If we start bringing in watches from other countries, then my watch industry, it will start to take, it won't make as much profit because people will start to buy different watches. So what we do as a country is whenever another country wants to bring watches in, we put a tax on it. So that means that the company who brought the watches in from another country, they have to pay a tax. So that means that when they bring their stuff to stores, they have to raise the price to make up for they have to make that profit, because now there's a little bit higher tax, so they have to raise it just to make make the same profit. That way people won't buy them. People will buy my watches because they're cheaper and they're from here. So that's protectionism. And then tariffs are these taxes that people impose on them. And then what you can get is trade wars. When one country places tariffs on a good of another country, the other country will do the same sort of thing. So kind of before the coronavirus was a thing, and kind of before the Iran U.S. sort of butting of heads came together, we had a trade war kind of going between the United States and China. The U.S. was putting tariffs on Chinese goods to kind of try and help the U.S. goods out, and the Chinese responded the same way. So there was a fear that this was going to impact the world economy. Well, then we kind of had the World War III scare, and then we're still going through the coronavirus, so people kind of forgotten about it. But it is still, if you follow that thread underneath all the mainstream media coverage of the pandemic, it still exists, because the United States under President Trump is really adopting a protectionism and isolationist policy. The idea of "Make America Great Again," that slogan that you can find on hats, that is very much a protectionist policy, and that's a lot of what Trump has done in his country. So, to summarize, what are the responses of the nation states to internationalism? Well, they can either go to isolationism, where they have limited or no interaction with the international community. They can go unilateralism, where they can say, we're doing it our way and forget you, because we're not listening to any sort of international organizations. They can do bilateralism, where they can have these agreements with a country to try to resolve issues. You can go multilateralism, where they can have a whole group of countries come together and say, hey, let's work on this together, actually. There's supranationalism, where they can have an organization that could be that it's an official organization where they come together to solve these sort of issues. Or they can say protectionism, where they say our stuff is more important, so we're going to focus on it, and instead of sort of making an agreement where we can come to an understanding on internationalism. So that's it for today. Hopefully that was helpful. If not, let me know. You can email me with questions or concerns. And And yeah, that's it. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to post on our announcement section the timeline for the how the rest of this year is going to work out. So yeah, that's it for today. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you Monday.